CRT has these general criteria.
Okay.
We're okay with our ethical theories, we understand social contracts.
Consequentialism?
Sure. Consequentialism and non-consequentialism. So a very, at least from what I've seen from previous teachers that I've dealt with, a common example used to describe consequentialism versus non-consequentialism. Okay. If you think back to World War II, right? In Nazi Germany, they were trying to round up the Jewish people, correct? Some of the Germans understood that this was not a moral thing, so they would hide Jews in like their basements to keep them away from the police. And so one day, the police come and they knock on the door of a family that's harboring some Jewish refugees. And they say, do you have any Jews in your house? And at that point, we run into this. If you are a consequentialist, you could say that, well, the end goal is to keep this Jewish family safe. I am going to lie. So I have achieved a good result through a bad method. The bad method is lying, because lying is bad. But I've done so in order to achieve a good result. I kept these people safe. That is consequentialism. A non-consequentialist might go, all right, lying is bad. I cannot lie. I need to answer in a way which does not involve lying. I need to answer in a method that is good while hopefully still achieving a good outcome. Right? But even if I can't achieve a good outcome, I need to make sure that whatever method I do, it is good. So I cannot lie. Right? So in this case, they might be like, ask my brother or something like that, right? Pass it on because they can't lie. Because their philosophy says they cannot lie because lying is bad. Or they could just say, yes, we've got refugees in the house, right? In which case, method is good, end result is bad. Right? So in this case, bad method, good end result. In this case, good method, bad end result. Doesn't always have to be like that though, right? Sometimes it could be flipped. Right? Sometimes you could have utilitarianism, right? Where you use this in a negative way. Right? It's like, all right, well, I want to achieve world peace. Right? How can I achieve world peace? Well, those people over there are trying to fight me, so I am going to bomb their country out of existence. Great, I have now achieved peace. Right? Good end through bad means. But one could argue that bombing an entire nation out of existence is not worth the end result, right? So consequentialism, right, isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. Non-consequentialism, deontology, isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. You take either of these to their extremes, and you will end up with a very bad situation. Right? So these are just different ways to look at the world. Right? That's all philosophy is, right? Ways to look at the world. And usually it's just going to be some scale between consequentialism and non-consequentialism. Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions?
Do you want us to memorize the characteristics of moral excellence?
Which one?
I think caring, faith, hope, compassion, courage, and fidelity.
Oh, virtue-based ethics.
Yeah.
Be able to recognize that they belong to virtue-based ethics. Right? I'm not going to ask you to recite the 6 of them back to me, but if I show you hope, recognize that it is a virtue-based ethic rather than like a moral principle or something like that.
And the moral principles, if you want us to memorize what they mean.
Correct. Know the definitions of your moral principles. Are we okay to move on to the next chapter?
For your
Yes,
test,
sure.
are you gonna have like case study type of questions?
Am I going to have case study type of questions? I may give you a situation and ask you to identify parts of the situation. So some questions will be pure definition, some questions will be more critical thinking, where you have to look at a situation and decide what answer best fits that situation. Anything else?
So when do you expect us to do the extra credit exam for the extra credit work for the last exam?
Okay, yes. So let's talk about the extra credit at the end of class because I want you to all focus on this first, and then we'll discuss it near the end. This isn't a very long chapter, I don't think, so we should have time. So, for chapter 25, we are going to be discussing patient records. If you've ever gone to the doctor, right, and they entered information to your records, you would have seen this, right? Also shows up on medical shows, medical dramas, right? Get me the patient's chart, right? Things like that. So when we talk about the patient's medical record, we are talking about your chart. Okay, the patient's medical record, this is a document that communicates information about their care and their history of care. Right? So we can see all of the procedures, all the medications, all the problems that the patient has had. So we have a holistic view of what is going on with the patient. Now, it is important that we keep HIPAA in mind when dealing with a patient's health record, when dealing with the chart. First and foremost, are you supposed to enter the chart of a patient you are not taking care of? You're not allowed to do that?
No.
What if you went to that, what if you were a patient at that hospital before? Are you allowed to go to your own own chart?
Nope.
Okay, very good. So, even if it's your very own chart, right, you're not supposed to be going in there. You're only allowed to go to the charts of patients who you're directly involved in taking care of. Yes?
This is excluding things like my chart or whatever, where it's the patient reaching a third party to get their chart, right?
Correct. Right, so yes, you have my chart, I think that Kelsey Siebel, or?
That's Methodist, UT Health.
Right,
That's, yeah.
okay, a bunch of hospitals use that system, yeah. So yes, right, that's your account that you use to log in to check the chart, right? But if you are working at the hospital, right, and you have access to go into the chart and start looking or adding or editing information, right, you should not be doing that unless it is a patient you are actually taking care of. You need a good reason to go into a patient's chart. Once you are in the chart, are you allowed to just look around at all the different tabs and all the different histories? Once again, you are not. You're only supposed to look at the information that is pertinent to your examination. So if I need to go into a patient's chart because I want to check, have they had a pregnancy test done yet? Right? I'm only going to go and search their labs for a pregnancy test. I'm not, right? Or maybe I'll go and see if they've had previous x-rays before, okay, so that I can get an idea of maybe what I am looking at. But I'm not going to go and start looking at their doctor's visit from 3 months ago. I'm not going to go and look at what medications they're taking unless it's important to me, right? In the case of contrast. But I'm not going to go and pull up their MRIs or their EKGs or anything like that unless I absolutely have to. I'm going to limit myself to the minimum amount of information necessary to do my job, right? That is part of HIPAA as well. So, health records are handled by Health Information Management. Okay, so the HIM department, Health Information Management. In the old days, patients would have physical charts. It would be a giant binder like this thick, full of paper, and that was the chart. Nowadays, records are held as information on the computer. We have electronic health records. As part of the electronic health record, the different procedures are assigned codes. So coding is the act of converting diagnoses and procedures into a numeric classification system. And these codes are then used for things like insurance reimbursements. So it's like, all right, you've got an X-ray. X-ray is code 71045, and so insurance is going to return this much money. This, anyone happen to know anyone that works in like coding and billing or anything like that? All right, great. Oh, that's where you used to work. Wow, excellent. So this should be very familiar. Okay. I actually have a family member who's going through a medical coding and billing program as well. So they've been working with this sort of stuff too. Just converting. It can be tough. It seems like a lot of data entry and a lot of cross-checking and stuff like that.
You also end up doing the charting for the.
You end up doing the charting.
Because if it's not right,
It's not legal, but-
the insurance company won't pay.
Right, if it's not right, the
I used to
insurance-
work in medical billing at Charity Hospital.
Ah, okay. Yeah. And yeah, that's a very big thing, right? Because if the stuff's not correct, then insurance won't pay. So as a tech, that is something that you will also need to help watch out for, because sometimes, I know when I first got trained, a big thing I was told was, you need to check the reason for exam. Like, all right, what am I looking for? You cannot let those doctors try and put as the reason for exam, rule out so-and-so, because insurance will not take it. I was like, ah, okay. So it's like a quarter of the x-rays that came through. It's like, chest x-ray, rule out pneumonia. Like, excuse me, doctor, I'm gonna need you to change the order on this x-ray. You can't use rule out as your reason for exam. Well, why not? Well, you can't do it, right? Insurance doesn't like it. You've got to be like, you've got to give a reason as to why you suspect pneumonia. And so it's like, okay, shortness of breath, chest pain, right? Crackles in the lungs, right? Put that as your reason for exam instead. So there's a lot of training the doctors and residents to put information in correctly to make sure insurance will take it. Okay, HIM, right, responsible for making sure records are complete and readily accessible. So if I wanted to, I could pull up patient records from this computer right here, because it is all networked as part of the Harris Health system. And these must be maintained for a specific amount of time. This varies from state to state. Oftentimes, hospitals do keep records for longer than necessary. In fact, what is that?
What is Texas?
Like 7 years, I think.
I'm actually not sure.
Is it 10?
I'm not sure. I'll need to look that up for you. I'll look that up during the break. Back when I first started working, we were in the process of transitioning a lot of stuff from physical into digital, and they used to have this giant shelf system that was on rails just to store all of the information. But eventually they got it all moved in, and then they got rid of that entire storage section and turned it into what is now Bentov IR. So if you ever go to interventional radiology at Bentov, just imagine that that entire section used to be just filled with shelves of information. Okay. Patient record standards. So it's important that patient records are standardized. That way, if you transfer patient records from one location to another, they all follow the same general format. They all have the same types of information. So these standards are established by accrediting agencies. For example, we have the Joint Commission, TJC. That one should look kind of familiar. And we also have the Healthcare Facilities Accreditation Program, HFAP. So they say that records must contain sufficient information in order to do these 5 things. There must be enough information to properly identify the patient, right? So if all there is the name Maria Cruz, that's not enough to identify the patient. Right? Need date of birth, and addition, we have medical record numbers that uniquely identify the patient. So even if there are 2 Maria Cruzes born on the exact same day of the exact same year, we can still tell them apart. We need information to support the diagnoses. Okay, so it can't just be patient has the flu, we need to have information supporting that diagnosis. Need information to justify the treatment. Need to be able to document in the course of the treatment and the results of the treatment. Need to facilitate continuity of care. This is a big one, because this is what lets you move around through different doctors, through different healthcare providers, and your care is able to keep going. Right? Because you want your doctors to be able to pick up where the previous one left off. You don't want to start everything back from square one again. And in order to do that, the new doctor needs all the information necessary to continue the line of care. So all the information from the old doctor gets transferred to the new one. There's all this information so the new doctor can see exactly why decisions were made and what the next step is going to be. So, in order to do this, what kind of information do we need? Well, we need patient identification data. We need the medical history of the patient. We need reports of relevant findings. We need the diagnostic and therapeutic orders, right? Any exam that was done should be listed in the chart. That way you don't have 3 doctors all ordering chest x-rays on the same patient. Clinical observations should be in there, okay? What did we notice about the patient? Reports and results of the diagnostic and therapeutic procedures and or tests. Evidence of appropriate informed consent. Very important. If the patient decides to sue, you need to show that you properly informed the patient about the risks of the procedure. And then conclusions at the time of discharge, instructions for follow-up care. And so all of this is information that should be included in the patient's chart.
Can you go back, please?
All of this information is also located in chapter 25 of your textbook, in case you wanted the list of items here.
That's page 312.
So, alright, so taking pictures, right? You could, but honestly, you could just also look in your book as well. It's in bigger font. It's in a nicer table as well. Not bullet pointed. At least I don't think it is. Okay, moving on. As far as patient records are concerned, entries should be dated and authenticated. Right? This shows when something was done, right? It's proof that something was done at a certain time. If it is hard copy, right, we need a signature in pen, definitely not pencil. Color, doesn't matter. Electronic copy, we need an electronic signature. What do we mean by that? Basically, you log in under your own credentials, and then you sign with your credentials. Abbreviations. Abbreviations in the chart should be avoided unless specifically approved. Now, why do you think this is the case?
To prevent miscommunication.
Okay, to prevent miscommunication, Mansi?
Misinterpreted for something else.
Misinterpreted for something else. Very good. Right? Because we can have an abbreviation, but not everybody will think that abbreviation means the same thing. For example, a common exam that you might see, or a common reason for exam you might see, okay? It's like chest x-ray, or hand x-ray. And what's the reason for the hand x-ray? FU surgery. Now, if I say FU surgery, what are you thinking that means?
Oh, it's a hand.
Forget that surgery.
Right, right. You think I'm saying the bad word, right? The FU surgery, right? But what does FU surgery actually stand for?
Follow up.
Follow up from surgery. Right, so you're doing a hand x-ray because you're following up after the hand surgery. Does that make sense? So, just because we use an abbreviation doesn't mean everyone uses that same abbreviation. So we do want to try and avoid abbreviations in the patient's permanent record. Right? That way it's clear what we are trying to say. Now, a lot of times when you get orders, the orders will have abbreviations. Okay? But if you look at the reports and the results, those are usually properly written out. Okay, so in 2004, the Joint Commission actually created a do not use list of certain abbreviations. These are abbreviations that were found to be routinely confusing or potentially dangerous. So, for example, using the letter U for unit, like 4 units of blood, right? 4U. What they found was that the U could be mistaken for the number 0, or it could be mistaken for the number 4, or it could be mistaken for CC, which means milliliters, right? Depending on handwriting. So rather than using U, it's better to write out the entire word unit. IU, international unit, right? So when we talk about stuff like, honestly, I'm not even sure when we use IU, but they say that instead of using IU, right, because the U can look like a V, and suddenly it looks like an IV, right, intravenous, or the U's kind of closed at the top to look like a 10. It's better to just write out the whole word, international unit. Now, we also have these two abbreviations here. This is often seen in pharmacy. You have QD. QD means daily, right? So 4 pills QD, right? 4 pills a day. Or you could have QOD, which means every other day, right? So you take 1 pill on Monday, you skip Tuesday, take 1 pill on Wednesday, you skip Thursday. But they look very similar to each other, right? Especially for the dots here, the periods. You know how some people, when they write periods, it actually looks kind of like a circle? So it makes it possible that these two can be confused for each other. So the recommendation, don't use the abbreviation here, just write out daily, write out every other day. Especially when you're dealing with doctors' handwritings, right? You already know how hard that is to decipher, and then you're adding on very similar looking abbreviations to that. better if it is fully written out. Okay. When dealing with numbers, do not put .0. Right? So instead of saying 3.0 milliliters, just say 3 milliliters. Right? Because that point, if it's faint or if someone overlooks it, suddenly it's 30 milliliters instead of 3 milliliters. Okay. On the other hand, if it is a small number with a decimal point in the front, do not put 0.3. Because if someone misses the point, it just looks like a 3. Put 0.3. Right? Because the only time there should be a 0 in front of a number is if there's a point here. It's a 0.3 to make it less likely to be confused. Right. Over here, we have MS. MS can stand for morphine sulfate, can stand for magnesium sulfate. Right? Throughout the whole thing. Right? Same thing for these chemical symbols. MsO4 and MgSO4. Kind of similar, kind of confusing. Just write out the whole thing. So, these are examples of how abbreviations could be potentially troublesome inside a patient's chart. When you go to clinic and you do look over a patient's history when you're getting ready for an exam, will you see abbreviations in there? Yes, you will. When you get an X-ray order, will you see abbreviations under the reason for exam? Yes, you will. Right? So, it doesn't mean that you're always going to see everything written out fully. Abbreviations still exist. Right? But just be careful. Just be wary of those abbreviations. Now, if on a hard copy medical record, there is a mistake that has been made, how do we correct that mistake? Do we just pull out an eraser and, well, no, because this is in pen. But do we pull out whiteout and just white it over and write down the correct thing? No, we cannot, right? We need a record of what the original thing was and what the new thing is. Okay, so do not take a pen and try and scratch out the mistake and then write in the correct thing. Okay, you need to be able to read the old mistake. So, single line through the mistake, and then next to it, write a note explaining what happened and put the correct information there. And then also date and authenticate that change. Does that make sense? Yes?
Do we have to remember the 2004? Or that's not?
No, I don't care about the
the
date.
test?
No, don't care about the date. Okay. Very important here. Before you do any X-ray, you must have an order in the patient record. The order must list exactly which exams are to be done. So, if a doctor comes up to you and says, hey, I need a chest X-ray on patient A, and you go to the computer and it's like, all right, I'd be happy to do it, but I don't have an order yet. And you're like, I'm going to go visit some patients first, but when I get back, I'll put in the order. Just do the X-ray first. Are you supposed to do that X-ray?
No.
No, right? You need that order in the system. Now, will it ever happen that you end up doing an X-ray while there is no order? Yes, it will happen. And I'll give you an example. A patient comes in, they've had 3 gunshot wounds, they're on a table, they need a quick chest X-ray to make sure the patient is stable enough to go up to surgery. While the doctors are in the room trying to take care of the patient, the nurses are in the room trying to take care of the patient, there is no one to put in the order right now. Do you just say, no, I need one of you to stop what you're doing, put the order in, and then I'll shoot the X-ray? Well, technically that's what you're supposed to do,
You can try it.
right? You're probably not going to make many friends that way. and you're potentially putting the patient's life in danger, right? So it comes down to that consequentialism versus non-consequentialism again, right? Is it okay to not to shoot it without the order, right? Which is not the right thing to do, right? In order to speed up the process of getting the patient to surgery. Right? So you will see situations where you may need to shoot an X-ray without an order, but when that happens, if that ever happens, please make sure that you go back and get the doctor to put the order in before you try and send those X-rays over to the electronic records, right? So you can take the X-ray, the preliminary result shows up on the screen, so the doctors can look at it, but before you actually send them across officially, that order needs to be in, right? So for the registry, for the exam, know that they have to be in before the X-ray, but in real life, know that things aren't always going to be so black and white. Once the order is in, you can shoot the X-ray. Once you shoot the X-ray, the images will go across to the folder which contains the order. The doctor, usually a radiologist, will then see the image and they will dictate a report. And this will give the results of the X-ray or the procedure. Certain procedures, like fluoroscopy procedures, also require information about the radiation dose to be included. So when you are dealing with X-rays in surgery or in fluoroscopy, moving images, moving X-rays, for those, you do need to send across a dose report. That dose report will follow the patient, so their dose can be monitored. Okay. There are two types of coding that I need you to know, or at least be able to recognize. One is ICD-10, second is CPT-4. ICD-10 stands for International Classification of Diseases, 10th revision. Just based on the name, International Classification of Diseases, what do you think we are coding here?
Diseases.
We are coding diseases. We are coding diagnoses. Right? So if the patient is diagnosed with something, that something will have a code. If a patient has shortness of breath has a code. On the other hand, we have CPT-4, that stands for Current Procedural Terminology, or petition. Based on the name alone, what do you think this is used to code? Right, the type of exams, the type of procedures. So, for a chest X-ray, the CPT code is 71045. Right? One view chest X-ray. Two view chest X-rays, different code, 71046. So procedures go under CPT, diagnosis, disease, that goes under ICD-10. Right? So, if you had a test question, and the test question asked you, which of these would be coded for using the ICD-10, and your options were chest X-ray, OR case, glucose, or insulin, right? And then the fourth one was something like the flu. Which of those four would go under ICD-10? Flu, right? Because that's a diagnosis, that is a disease. The others would be procedures. Okay. So be familiar with what each one is used for.
So do you want us to know the 71045?
I do not need you to memorize the numbers.
Okay.
Although, if you do memorize the numbers, that can only help you once you go into the workforce.
So, bonus question?
So the
No promises.
CPT-4, that one's for procedures, and the first one's for diagnosis.
Correct. Shortness of breath. heart attack, chest pain, right? All of that would go under ICD-10. If you see this term here, diagnosis-related groups, DRGs, let's remember, right, diagnosis goes to diseases. So DRGs are used in conjunction with ICD-10. Legal aspects. So, the health record is a legal document. Has Mr. Donahue gone over this with you already regarding markers and stuff? How the health record is a legal document? Your images are legal documents. Okay, so health records are legal documents. They can be submitted as evidence in court cases. I know a technologist who did a procedure on a patient. Patient later came back, complained, and sued the hospital, and yet the tech actually had to be brought into court, right, as a witness, I believe. So he had to help defend that health record. So yes, you may be required to give testimony during or give testimony about procedures or information in that health record. Patients may request amendments to their health records. They may ask for parts of their health record to be changed in case there was a mistake in the health record. Remember, the people entering the information into the records are only human. Sometimes mistakes will be made.
It's like a typo in the last name or
Right. Typos in the name, wrong birth dates,
misgender.
wrong medical record number, wrong gender. Right. And of course, as a provider, you may also correct errors in the health record. Just remember, if you do correct the error, follow the steps we talked about previously. Hard copy, single line, explanation, name, and date.
What about
Yes.
electronic?
Electronic, it will keep track of who made the changes. So if you try and make a change, it will say last edited by blah 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 at so and so time.
Because I had a lot of patients that were like, oh wait, this is a misspelling. Like they would come from the doctor's office and the lab and radiology, I would check them in, and like, this is not right. This is not how my name is spelled.
Right.
So I mean, for us, we're in admin, so we are able to change the name within their chart.
Mhm.
We didn't really, I mean, we just do it. I don't know if there was any other protocol that we were supposed to do.
So most softwares will just keep track of any changes made. So it's kind of like how, if you change a document in Word, it'll tell you when the last time you accessed it and changed information was. Same idea. They should be keeping a record of that by themselves. Right. Confidentiality, once again talking about HIPAA, once again talking about that personal protected health information, the PHI. So, remember, informing patients of examination results is the responsibility of the doctor, not the technologist. Even if you already have the doctor's report, you should not be reading that to your patients or to anyone who asks, right? That is private, and it's the doctor who should be telling the patient. Release of information does need to follow certain protocols. So we do have a release of information form. There are penalties for wrongful disclosure of PHI. So on Monday, I believe we talked about getting copies of your x-rays, right? Getting copies of your x-rays need to follow certain protocols, right? There's a release of information form, right? A request for a CD form, so that they can get their PHI in the proper manner. Employees should be familiar with policies related to information security. So this isn't just about HIPAA and PHI, but make sure you are aware of basic computer and basic internet safety as well. Right? Be aware of cyber risks and have cyber awareness. And so, for example, don't open weird links from fishy emails, right? Don't follow attachments to random locations. Yes?
Does the hospital utilize a sort of a VPN or anything like that?
The hospital does have a VPN for like access into in-house servers, yes.
Okay. Like to protect us from those fishy things and whatnot.
So VPNs do not protect from phishing.
Or am I thinking of antivirus or?
So antivirus perhaps, yes.
Okay.
But for a VPN stands for virtual private network. Basically what that means is the hospital's servers are secured, right?
Mhm.
We have an intranet where the computers can communicate with each other, but do not communicate to the outside. If I want to access my Harris Health account from a non-Harris Health computer, I would need to use a VPN to get in, right? And so we do have that ability if I need to work from home, for example.
That's what that secure thing that we have to utilize when like those advanced emails are outside emails. It, like,
Okay,
pops
so
up a different file or whatever.
so what you have is Improvata.
Yeah.
Improvata is what we call two-factor authentication. So the idea is, let's say that somebody manages to get your Harris Health login information, your username and your password, and they try to log into your email. When they try and log in your email, they run into the screen that says, please confirm on Improvata, right? They hopefully do not also have access to your cell phone, right? Hopefully you have your cell phone still with you. So at that point, that's as far as they can go. For you, because you have the cell phone, you can see what the code is, or you can press the approve button on Improvata, and that is the second layer of defense that will finally let you into your email. Right? So even though they might be able to steal your information, your username and password, they still can't access your Harris Health email. So two-factor authentication is a very, it's a very powerful security tool. If you have any other websites or things that use two-factor authentication, I do personally recommend that you have that activated, just to make sure that even if someone gets your information, they can't get into your items, because they still have that second layer there to get through. Oftentimes, right, banks will have the same thing. You try and log into your bank account, they ask you to enter in the verification code, right? Two-factor authentication.
Does it ask you for those questions, like the security questions?
Right, security questions are different. Security questions are, they're kind of a layer of defense, but oftentimes, if they know enough of your information, they can give a pretty good guess to your security questions. Especially when the questions are like, you know,
On social
what
media.
town did I live in when I was 3 years old? What's my first elementary school?
Your mom's
What's my mom's maiden
Okay.
name? Right, that's stuff that you could Google with like enough effort.
Who was
So-
your first pet? Just go to their Instagram.
Nowadays, that's true, isn't it? Yeah, but back in my day, we didn't have Instagram. We had a Post-it. I was around when MySpace came up. I never used it.
Oh, I have MySpace.
That was like when I was in like junior high or college or high school. Yeah. Yeah, that was before
I was
Facebook.
probably in like third or fourth grade.
Yeah, I think Facebook came up when I was like in senior year. Okay, anyway, sorry, enough of memory lane. One more important thing about information security here at Harris Health. You are not, and I repeat, you are not allowed to stick a USB drive into a Harris Health computer. You are not allowed to attach USB devices into Harris Health computers. In fact, you should not even attach your phones into a Harris Health computer, right? Do not take your USB cable, stick one end into the computer, the other end into your phone. Do not do that with any Harris Health device. Okay, that is something that IT has put into place. So if you do have a large file that you need to transfer, Right? Make sure that you put it onto a Dropbox or something like that, so that we can transfer it over that way, rather than using a USB. Once again, do not try and access information you have no reason to access. If you are working with electronic health records, some patients, when you try and go to the chart, will pop up with a screen that says, would you like to break the glass? Right? It requires you to break the glass to view the information. So for example, if I want to look up, if I'm doing an x-ray on an inmate, right, a prisoner, and I try and look at their health records, I might get a pop-up that says, would you like to break the glass? Or if I'm looking at a health record that belongs to another employee, it might pop up, would you like to break the glass? And so, if you need access to that information, you will need to, once again, authenticate that yes, it is you accessing the information, and that yes, you have a valid reason to do it, and then you break the glass. And as soon as you break the glass, that sends an alert over to the administrator notifying that someone has accessed that file.
But not the person not the person who like the file belongs to?
Correct, not the person the file belongs to, but you as a technologist. So, for example, if Shaheen suddenly ended up in the hospital, and I need to do an x-ray on Shaheen, if I try and go into her chart to start documenting the information on the x-ray, it's going to pop up, do you want to break the glass? I'm going to be like, okay, yes. Name's Wilson Phung. Reason, I am documenting her x-ray procedure. Break the glass. At that moment, an alert goes to the administrator. Shaheen doesn't see anything, but the administrator will know that I have now accessed Shaheen's medical records. Okay. Now, HIPAA does not explicitly prohibit you from viewing your own PHI, but you should not do it. Right? Just because HIPAA does not prohibit it does not mean the healthcare organization does not. Most hospitals will have rules in place that says you cannot view your own chart. You need to go through the same process as everyone else. Okay. All right, and so that is the end of the medical records chapter. Any questions over what we covered? A lot of it was about privacy, a lot of it was about HIPAA, and then we had a few things about the actual chart itself. Yes,
So did you say everything that you spoke about now is in this chapter?
yes, all of
So
this is in
maybe the chapter will be good enough for the test.
Good enough? I'm never going to say good enough. I will never say good enough.
Even reading this chapter is not the ultimate, so there should be more.
Read the chapter, look at the information. If there's information you don't understand, try and find out more about that information. Any other questions? Everyone feels like we're okay with this?
I don't like that.
No? Alright, somewhat related to this chapter, but not directly. Earlier we talked about abbreviations, correct? So I do want to kind of briefly go over some abbreviations you may end up seeing in clinic. So I'm just going to start throwing up some abbreviations here, and let's see if you can figure out what these are.
I don't know if you.
Chest X-ray.
Chest X-ray.
All right, so first of all, CXR, that's right. CXR is a chest x-rays. All right, so you might,
Is that one of the qualified or
Usually it's in the order.
It's in the order.
so,
2 inches.
so in the chart, you'll usually see it written out, but oftentimes in orders, it'll just be CXR. All right, what about this?
Kidney, ureter,
Ah, great, you all learned about this.
and what? These
Bladder.
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 Good.
Ureter and bladder.
Ureter and bladder.
kidney, ureter, bladder. So when you see KUB, it's asking for basically an abdominal X-ray, correct? A supine abdomen.
Also AP, sir?
AP supine abdomen. Okay. What about this one? This one is a bit more obscure.
DHT. Diarrhea.
Supine.
Oh, is that like a
DJU.
All right, so we've got a few abbreviations here now, correct? So, first one here, SP. All right, so this one stands for status post. So what is the status of the patient after whatever comes next, right? So what is the status of the patient? How is the patient like after a procedure has been done? So DHT then is the thing which has been done. So I'll give you a hint. The T here stands for tube. Alright, it's okay. I don't expect you to know this one. DH stands for Dobhoff. This
Hey,
is
no way.
so status post Dobhoff tube need have right.
What,
This is what
what is that?
it really stands for. A Dobhoff tube is a feeding tube.
Oh,
So if a patient is not able to eat for themselves, they stick the tube like down the nose or down the mouth into the stomach, and that is the feeding tube.
wait, Professor Donahue mentioned that in our class today, but he called it something else, and it was in reference to a pediatric patient. They had it directly it was like a, you know in dialysis where they have the port? It was like a feeding port. Is that something similar? He said something like a tap or,
A tap.
like, I don't know. A tap to me, I think of a keg. So, it's like a keg to their stomach.
I'm actually not too familiar with pediatrics, so I'm not quite sure
Okay.
what that one would be.
And he left today too. Dang.
But DHT, Dobhoff tube, that's a feeding tube, goes to the stomach.
Can you see me on our test?
So these will not be on your exam, but it's good to know these because you're going to see these in clinic. You're going to be under reasons for exams. It's good to know why you're doing the X-rays. Maybe I should put these on the exam.
That will,
Yeah, maybe because what is
I don't know.
What did they do? Why?
Why do you do
this?
this?
Who hurt you?
Just abbreviation, not his
All right, so
story, and then people.
now that we have that, what about?
That's NG.
so status post.
Nasogastric tube.
Very good. NG tube, nasogastric tube. Right, once again, T stands for tube, NG, nasogastric, from the nose to the stomach. You also have OG tubes,
Yeah.
oral